Without further ado, for those of you just joining us, we're talking about using Figma for the classroom. We have Rian Long and Steph Kotula, two instructors at PSU. I'm going to hand it over to you all. Let me stop share and share your screen.
I'll get right on it. All right. Hey, y'all. Thanks for coming. We're just going to jump right into it. We're going to talk a little bit just about ourselves real quickly, about the program that we work in, then get slightly into our teaching philosophy that just goes over all of the ways that we are using Figma, but also all the ways that we are just thinking about teaching in general. And then we're going to dive into the files themselves. We'll show you exactly some of the live files that we're using to teach, and also jump into some of the ways that we're grading and doing some of the back-end things as well.
Yeah, well, so we could introduce ourselves, but we're going to introduce each other just to mix it up a little bit. This is Rian. Rian is my co-professor. He graduated from Portland State, which is where we teach now. And he's a designer at Instrument, and we've been at Instrument for just under 3 years. He's from California, but left Portland not too long ago. And now he's living in San Francisco. And he loves his cat, Tobias, as do I. And he's a multi-marathon runner, which is pretty cool.
Haven't ran in a while. But Steph graduated from RIT. Miguel, actually, our wonderful MC, was one of her professors for design. She's also a designer at Instrument with me. Love the camera effects, Miguel. And has also been at Instrument for about 3 years. She's originally from Pennsylvania and also left Portland this fall, and has been just traveling and working remotely. And you're currently in Salt Lake City, Utah. And I'm just seeing all the skiing videos and photos coming out of there.
It's great.
So we teach at Portland State University. It is a large public university downtown in Portland, Oregon. We specifically teach in the Portland State Graphic Design program, which is a small major embedded in the School of Art and Design. The program primarily focuses on typography, branding, illustration, print media design, and only recently are they starting to make this shift to offer a more robust digital path for students. So they're starting to get into UI UX, as well as just many other digital approaches. So we're excited to be part of this new wave of courses. And we teach an intro to interactive design course, as well as an interactive design principles course. And for the majority of students that we have, this is their first UI UX class. And it's their first time even kind of hearing that term. So really exciting to leave that first impression on the university.
Yeah, so let's rewind a bit to a year and a day ago. We began sort of planning our first class on March 4th, 2020. And this was our first time ever teaching, and we were very new to sort of how it all worked. And then a week later, quarantine officially started in Portland, and we knew we were going to be remote. So we basically had 2 weeks to sort of completely rewrite and rethink this class to fit our remote format. And it's a cool thing to note that Rian and myself have never worked on our class from the same room. Our entire class was planned and created and taught online from separate locations, and most of the time, separate time zones. And Figma has very much allowed us to do that.
Hey, Ryan, you're muted.
Love that. So because we are using tools like Zoom and Slack and other communication platforms, we are able to make this digital remote learning happen. We have to work from 2 different areas like Salt Lake City and San Francisco. And so we need tools to both communicate with each other and with our students. One program you probably all know already is Slack. It is our central hub for announcements, class-wide communication. It allows students to reach us any time of day, whether we like it or not. It is also our single source of truth for homework and projects. It allows us to communicate on the fly with threads. We also post all of our Zoom links in here, so we don't have to keep track of meeting IDs. We also do Zoom calls or Slack calls within Slack to completely control like our one-on-one communication. And then we've also used Slack in the past for turning in projects as sort of a Dropbox for students.
Yeah, and then Zoom, which we're all very familiar with by now, I'm sure. But we use Zoom and we pretty much follow the format where we have our students stay muted as we present. And of course, we've learned to use the chat in place of people talking out loud. And I think students do feel more comfortable working in that way. We use breakout rooms for small group sessions and critiques. And then we do use polls occasionally to have students engage in content in a different way. And then sometimes we do this thing where we have a choose your own adventure and students can kind of pick and choose what content they want to learn and sort of have a say in how we do the next class or two. And then I will note that having two of us makes Zoom so much better. It allows one of us to field questions from the chat and facilitate discussion, and it allows us to keep up with student management, and we're sort of able to pass off with each other as needed, which is really great.
So with Figma, we use what is called an education license. It's a free license for us and our students to be able to use Figma. They also get to use it 2 years after the class ends. So it's an excellent tool to then take them into the workforce and have them continue to do UI UX design outside of our class. We have student-facing files for lectures, exercises, project files. We also have a private set of files for all of our scheduling and grading. We organize everything into teams. So every term gets their own files and class lists and sets of slides. We also allow students to edit some files, and then we can add permissions to some, like our lecture slides. And Figma is also the tool that allows Steph and I to work together. We do teach synchronously. So we use Figma to do all of our content live and allow interesting things like this to happen, where Steph can bring in content as we're teaching. We can fix typos that we obviously make all the time. And we can do a lot more engaging elements when we have two teachers working in a live Figma file. So that out of the way, we just kind of want to talk a little bit about some of the overarching concepts that we try to implement in our classes. And the first things first, remote teaching, we try to have fun. I've played a lot with webcam setups. Similarly to Miguel and having his whole streaming setup, I like to have multiple webcams, one of which I put on my cat at all times while he's sleeping. So whenever we take a break during class, we turn on the Toads cam. I've also had some fun with OBS and doing some picture-in-picture effects. We'll decorate our physical backgrounds for holidays and overall just try to keep things light and have it less as a class and more like a casual knowledge share. But we also have to acknowledge that remote teaching is hard. It's different, and it's worth restarting with a new class structure and reevaluating your teaching strategies. So we decided to scrap the entire class that we were given at the beginning of March and rebuild a program that makes adjustments around our limitations as well as the benefits for remote learning.
Yeah, and some of those strategies that we've found that work are establishing a routine, a repetitive sort of structure that students get used to and know where to expect things from, and making information really easy to find. And then we've sort of done this thing where it's really important to have an MVP or a minimum viable product. So what is that baseline that we want, if nothing else, students to grasp throughout our class? And then we want to give our motivated students and the really, really driven ones opportunities and chances to excel and go above and beyond.
Starting with routine, we start every single class the same way. Same title slide, same recording reminder, because I always forget to record in Slack, and a class agenda. And depending on where we are with projects, we'll also have a schedule slide that allows students to see their project timelines and sometimes even timelines of what we're going to be teaching coming up. Figma allows us to create a consistent deck format with styles and components. And we also have a very predictable structure and routine that ensures students know where to find important information. And then we carry that routine into all of our communication on our other platforms. So every time we have a homework slide, we cross-post those assignments to our Slack. Lecture slides, resources, links to the Figma community, all that content is available both on Figma and on Slack. So we want to allow students to get to know what is the best preference for them and have them not have to swap between programs all the time.
Yeah, and in conjunction with having a good routine, we've tried to minimize the number of files that we have to keep content super easy to find. So we have one file that essentially holds the entire class, that's the lectures file, and then well-organized folders that hold all of our exercises and then student project files as well. And before we started the term, way back a year ago in March, Ryan and I reached out to Miguel to chat all things teaching. Miguel was one of my professors at RIT in college, so Miguel and I go way back. But one of the many amazing things that we took away from that conversation was to have a minimum viable product. Ryan and I had not thought of this at all. But figuring out what the bare minimum is that we want students to come away with, it's allowed us to sort of, it allows us to simplify and prioritize what we cover and how we grade and just how we focus the class.
And then once we develop that MVP, we try to give students who are motivated and really driven to learn the materials the opportunity to excel. We experimented this term with breaking lectures into levels and saying, here's the stuff you really need to know, and then get progressively more advanced. There are also students that are there to simply learn a new skill. I mean, this is an elective course at our school right now, but there are also those that really want to dive in, and we do our best to kind of accommodate both and push those that want to go further.
Yeah, and then another piece of our teaching philosophy is to what we're calling teach to the job. We want to make sure that we're connecting what we're teaching back to the real world and giving students a really concrete understanding of why we're going over what we go over. And especially right now, but on top of every student's mind is, how am I going to get a job after I graduate?
Two things we do are demystifying the work we do as designers. We work our day job at Instrument, and then at night we teach a class. So we share what we're currently doing that relates to the class and provide time for them to talk to us about the professional world. We also want to humanize our industry professionals. So we bring in our friends in the industry to have conversations in an open forum. And I think it's a priceless opportunity for students to learn about the field of UI and UX. Grounding the content in real world applications is essential for students to grasp some of these learning, some of the specific subjects that they're learning right now. So when they're doing wireframing and UX research and design documentation in class, they might be asking, why is this important to me? And seeing the industry use cases can help them understand the why. So we work with real clients and we want to share that work with them. So working within the confines of our non-disclosure agreements and also with the Zoom recordings turned off, we can take a moment to give students a look behind the curtain at some of our client work. It's also an excellent opportunity to show students what we do in Figma is exactly the same process that we teach them in class. And it's also an incredible inspiration moment to show them what is possible in Figma and how they can start to work towards the industry level.
And then another thing that we found is that one-on-one time is super important. We find one-on-one time can sort of beat out breakout rooms. Breakout rooms are great for ideation and critiques, but connecting with students in this way within one-on-ones just best mimics the actual classroom setting. And there's value in that time and understanding where students' passions lie. But I will say we are very fortunate to have the two of us because this can get very time consuming. So very grateful for my co-professor. And then open and honest conversations with our creative professional friends. Being remote, it's easier to invite some pretty impressive and wonderful industry professionals to class that probably otherwise wouldn't have been able to join. These folks probably wouldn't have been able to make it to a night class at PSU in person during their normal busy lives. So moving forward, we can also reach out to our more remote design friends and sort of connect our students to a world beyond Portland. And that's one of the huge benefits of a remote classroom, tapping into talent that's not necessarily in your backyard anymore.
So now diving into more of the technical things that we do, we want to look at some of the stuff in Figma because we use it for just about everything. We have a singular file for all of our lectures for students to track it, and for us, me and Steph, to collaboratively work on all of our decks in Figma.
Yeah, we have a schedule that breaks out our weeks and our lectures and our homework and project timelines. And it's really helpful for Ryan and myself to visualize how long the term is, how many lectures we have to create, and allows us to act really quickly when school is closed for weather or we feel students need a project extension.
We also do all of our class critiques and give each other feedback during class. Not only can we give feedback directly, but students can also jump in and leave notes and positive vibes on each other's work.
We have live exercises where students work alongside each other and really mimic that classroom collaborative environment. And we encourage students to run off into the void of the Figma file and find their own little cozy space to design.
Probably the least glamorous part of teaching, the syllabus. We design and host our syllabus inside of Figma. It's not only is it easy to find for students, but we over-design that as well.
As with lots of other things. We do all of our grading in Figma, and we've developed a color coding system and a labeling system to track progress between our 2 remote offices. So we use these green dots and red dots to indicate completion and our initials as we sort of synchronously and sometimes asynchronously sort of split up our work and split up progress for grading.
We also get creative with our exercises, and we try to mimic classroom activities, like this one where we're using Post-it notes to brainstorm a UX problem with the class.
And then all of our student projects are written, the written assignments as well are submitted through Figma, where we can see all of their process work, their final work, all in one space. And then we can give really pointed, specific feedback with comments in their file.
So without further ado, let's take a look.
Woohoo.
So jumping out, just wanted to reiterate that this is all using the Figma education license. So it's very easy to set up, and we've gone through this process about 5 times now. And for each class, we have a Figma team. So on the left-hand side, we have all of our previous classes, as well as our admin area where we've done scheduling and done grading in the past. This latest term, we also have everything organized out for all of our students, for all of their project work, all of the grading work that is hidden to all our students and just shown to us, our exercises, and we can jump right into our lecture slides.
Yeah, and the cool thing about lecture slides, we make them as we go, as Ryan and I kind of progress through the class, which also allows us to be flexible and sort of feel out where we might need to cover or where we can kind of skip over things. And we use consistent type and consistent colors to sort of make our process faster, so we don't over design things and so that we just focus on the content. Yeah, everything's here. This is It's
a very extensive amount of lectures. And one that I wanted to particularly call out is our prototyping lecture. We showed this just a little bit ago, where we have it split up into 3 different levels. So we allow the students to learn a little bit about some of the baseline prototyping tools that Figma offers, such as setting up your prototype, overflow behavior, having your navigation fixed on the screen. But then we allow students to level up and learn some more content, jump into some of the extra interaction tools, some of the auto animate features of Smart Animate, And then we also bring in UI screenshots because we want to keep them in one program at a time. So when they're looking at Zoom and just following along with us on screen, we can show them UI that they can memorize. And then when it's time to go and make some of this work, they can take all of that knowledge back into Figma and we can be in that program at that time. So watch and listen first and then dive in. So we had students work on that and then we had them jump into the exercises for prototyping. And because prototyping can be a little bit of a strenuous process when you have to design and prototype, we gave them all of the pieces that they needed to for this lecture. So we built out all of the pieces, gave every single student their own page so that they can have unique starting pages. And then we just had them all start connecting wires. For prototyping, we give them all pieces they need because oftentimes when you are doing these prototyping systems, there can be naming issues and things like that. And we can also be sure that they all output the same beautiful designs.
So I have a quick question.
Yeah.
So each student is in the page and then like you're doing this synchronous and live. So then this way you can kind of test their prototypes too.
Yes, and so we've actually tried a couple different variations of this exercise model where sometimes we've had students create their own file. And that became a little bit more difficult for us because we were opening like 20 tabs and having to check between all of them and be sure students were actually tracking on work. And we think this model works a little bit better. Usually we'll have them all on one page, but because of the way that we need starting frames for prototypes, we'll kind of split it out a bit more. But this makes it so not only can we jump from student to student and see how they're tracking on the work, but other students can be like, I'm struggling on this. I'm going to go check out what my other student in my class is doing and kind of get some pointers without having to just instantly jump to a question with me and Steph if they don't feel comfortable doing that.
Cool. And do you use this as like a way to like measure class engagement? I just saw that there was a question about someone says, do you notice any improvement of students' engagement compared to like a normal class? But I feel like you all haven't taught a normal class.
That's a really great acknowledgement. We have only taught remotely. So I would say we can't really gauge the differences between being in person and online. But we will say after teaching this, I think we're about to teach our 5th class remotely. We found that the engagement has gone much, much more up the more students can see other people working at the same time. When they're not just working in a bubble in separate files, students are a lot more engaged in knowing that there's like a community of people working together.
I love that. I love that a lot.
Yeah, and another thing to note about this exercises like this is that we sort of set aside time to have students ask us questions and we troubleshoot and we screen share. So a lot of times one student's having a problem, they're all having, or a lot more of them are having that problem. So we sort of do it in a way where we let them work and then we regroup and then we let them work again and then regroup, which is good.
Awesome.
Another lecture I wanted to jump to was how we do projects.
Yeah. So we just wanted to show when we introduce a project, we sort of share the goals, like the high level goals, of course, for the project. So it's clear what they're sort of learning and what they're going for beyond just designing beautiful screens. But it's really helpful to sort of connect what they did in a previous project and explain how they're going to grow and how it's sort of a continuum, how projects are a continuum of their progress. And then we kick off projects in class, similar to how we do at an agency. So back to that note of like teaching to the job, we sort of try to get them used to that format. And then with all of our teams and all of our students being in Figma, it's really easy to bring in and find past students' work. So we bring that in, show that, which is really great. And then we're sure to sort of lay out with as best information design as we can, lay out deliverables and have really clear instructions in that way too. And then just an example of a timeline. We show these all the time. I feel like we show them at the beginning of class, we show them at the end of class, they're in Slack, so that students are always aware of where they are and sort of what they're tracking towards.
I really like how you apply that and make this so visual. Can you go back to the teams? Because I think that this is one of my favorite things. I think the thing that like I absolutely love to see is when you show the project of all of the exercises. Like I really love the way that you are using the thumbnail view of each of those pages, and it's great. It's like an overall view. And then just in the deck that you're just showing, I know you already mentioned this, but like having those like kind of like lectures, the lecture slides like week by week, in the view over there in the tab. Yeah, like just loving to see that. So lecture 1, lecture 2, lecture 3, lecture 4. And I think, you know, like when you're working with students remotely, for them to just be able to adopt it, to visually see that. I love the way that you all have like structured and organized that. Just seeing this like kind of zoomed out view, you know, and the way that those slides are prepared, you know, it really gives them the ability to just kind of play and like live in that space.
Yeah,
So do you all,
oh, go ahead.
So what I would say is like, all right, like let's say when you all start, you know, teaching in person again, if you start teaching in person again, do you think that this would change, or do you think you would still kind of like keep a lot of these methodologies?
That's a good question.
Yeah, I mean, with an in-person setting, you would probably still want to have a similar organization model, so that students, when they're taking work home, can find everything that they need. I also think like the idea of having everyone in a single file could be even more engaging in person.
Yeah.
Could lead to more community being built when you're first joining a class and getting to know each other, to be able to work side by side, even from separate desks. So yeah, I think actually, absolutely, we would probably continue the same work if we were to do in person in the future.
Cool.
Yeah, agreed.
That's great to hear. So someone asked, how long are live classes?
They range. They typically range. Some of them are as quick as an hour, hour and a half, and then we have quite a few classes where we do go the full time, which is 3 hours, which is a lot. But we do try to break it up, and we try to give breaks. And even like sort of how you see these are sort of sectioned off with these title slides. We try to like mimic the feeling of moving quickly when you're cycling through those like title slides. We're progressing through sections really quickly. So yeah, it spans. It definitely varies for us.
I love the hit that record button, stop recording. Do y'all require cameras on for students?
We do not. We've asked for it maybe towards the beginning when we first were starting to teach, but we find a lot of students feel comfortable in just whatever way that they want to learn. Some of them are cooking while they learn. Some of them just don't prefer to be on camera at all times. And we are a night class, so we are definitely, as people are winding down in their day. But our chat is so engaged, and we don't really want to just call out students and have them have to speak at a moment's notice. We'd rather have that conversation just coming in through chat, so that not only can we teach and have that conversation, but as we're talking, some of those side conversations can be had, and Steph can be fielding questions. And then like, as I finish my point, we can go right back into some of those conversations that were being had on the side. It's actually maybe even more engaging than we would say in person, because we can kind of teach two things at the same time.
Mm-hmm.
That's awesome. Here, let me. Is there anything else that you have planned on showing? I know we kind of started going into some Q&A, but is there anything else you would like to share?
Yeah, I think I'd love to show some of the back end sort of things. If I could jump to grades, I think Steph has some things about that.
Yeah, so grading, we grade in Figma. We start with we made a rubric, and we start with an empty rubric for every student. And we grade students one by one. We used to write notes to our students in this sort of file, in this notes file, but it took a lot of time, and it was really unclear to be like, hey, that menu button on the third page, like we couldn't be like precise about our feedback. So we switched into commenting. So we grade in this rubric, and then we comment all of the contextual feedback right into their file. And that's been a really great time. We've saved a lot of time, Ryan and myself, but also like the feedback is more specific and it's interactive, and we can have conversations and explain ourselves. And then Figma allows us to asynchronously grade or synchronously grade, and we'll mark our initials on who's doing who, and then we'll change the emoji from red to green when we've sort of finished the file. And then we export the rubric page as a PDF, and to honor students' privacy, we Slack their specific grade, but the comments that are just largely just contextual and based off of their UX and UI thinking, students can learn from each other's feedback and sort of pick up on where just they're learning beyond just their own project. They're learning from everybody's project too, which is good.
That's so cool. So you actually export out, like, so this is a private file between y'all two, and then you go through, you divvy out the grading, you know, you have your rubric set up, and then you export out the PDF. So then each individual student gets their own little grading report.
Yeah,
Exactly.
absolutely. And then we can also send that in Slack. So if they have any comments or questions, that's already started the conversation, and we can have that sort of one-on-one chat there.
That's so cool. I love it. It's almost like you're making it more fun. Grading is usually just, you know. So I see another question. How many projects generally do you have per course?
3.
We do three projects. We've kind of tested having like 3 long projects, and now we're more on the ways of just doing 2 very short-term, like 3-week projects, and then 1 much longer project that kind of is the big one that we really want them to put in their portfolio, so they have all the knowledge, and then they can spend a lot of time on some final piece.
Yeah, we sort of use those first 2 projects as like practice rounds, because this is their first time, a lot of them, with the content that we're teaching. So 2 practice projects, and then 1 project that they can just put all their effort into.
Cool. Let's see if there's any other. How many students on per course on average?
20.
Right now we have 24. Our lowest was about 16. We almost always have a wait list for this class just because there's so few UI UX classes and students are really interested in the material. But of course, with 2 professors, we're able to take a larger group, so we usually let that wait list in.
Yeah.
Cool. So is there anything else you would like to share?
We can jump to, let's look at the schedule real quick.
Schedule. Yeah, the one thing that I saw with the schedule and like the little bit of a preview is the way that you're organizing everything by the weeks, and then you have like the day section. So it's more of that like educator's calendar.
Mm-hmm. So this one is specifically just for me and Steph. And
yeah.
This is a private file.
Yeah. So we made the schedule file a long time ago. And just like laid out, when Ryan and I started, we were like, we have to wrap our head around like how we break up all this time and ladder it up to projects and that MVP, all of our individual goals. And I mean, as designers, it's very helpful to visualize everything in this way, and move things around and make adjustments. And we have our existing term schedules too, so we can sort of see where we are in the timeline. But yeah, that schedule is super helpful in just laying out and trying to ladder up, at least for the first 2 projects, our homework and our exercises, our lectures, they ladder up to each of the project deliverables. So just making sure that all of those are in line with each other. And then the flexibility, the visualizing of the flexibility has been great with a graphic schedule like this.
That's awesome. Let's see. I think we have a few more questions here. Steph, I think you meant to send that to everyone, not just me. Let's see. So how much of the course is, So how much of the course is dedicated to teach students like how to use Figma? Like, are you teaching them how to use Figma, or are they already familiar with it?
Yeah, I can jump back to lecture slides real quick. Figma is brand new to just about all of our students. If they have learned Figma, it's something they've done on the side. Portland State does not teach it as a program until they reach this level. And we're talking to mostly juniors and seniors in this class. So for the first, I would say 3 to 4 weeks, we are just teaching UI, UX, and Figma. We don't really jump into any sort of like extra topics of UI design. We're just kind of getting those core concepts of what UX is and how to think about it. And then just all day Figma hotkeys, learning all the different features like prototyping. We jump into a UI deep dive where we talk about a bunch of components. But we also, in our intro to UI UX, we're calling out all of the different features in the font panel, showing them how to make all sorts of different shapes. And you'll see some doodles happening on these boards because Steph and I are making this content happen live while she's editing the board and I'm presenting it. So yes, we teach a lot of Figma.
Yeah.
That's cool. So I think that, I mean, it's good for students too, just because they're learning how to like work with others, they're learning how to communicate. There's just like a whole bunch of other skills that they're learning outside of just like UX design. Like they're learning like collaboration, they're learning how to like facilitate and communicate. Do they do presentations?
We started doing that. Do you want to talk to that, Steph?
Yeah, we actually didn't do that our first couple terms, our first couple classes. And then this past, actually a couple weeks ago, we had them put together a deck and present their project 3 ideas. So we sort of gave them an outline and then let them touch on those points in whatever way that they saw fit. But it was a good way for us to actually get a good idea of what they were thinking about for project 3. We did breakout rooms. So we just had 2 breakout rooms and had each of them sort of go through and express their ideas. And I think that that's a thing that we might start to do a little bit more of. It's a really great benchmark. It's a really great way to get students to think fully about a problem and think fully about a project versus what we were doing before was have them post their project ideas in Slack and things like that. And we sort of had to go through and give feedback in that way. So yeah, I think we started to do that and there's definitely value, at least for what we've done with projects, just initial ideas and just tracking on those.
That's awesome. So we have a question here. Can you go over just really quickly how you do the folder sharing levels? Well, basically how you are like using the team structure with the projects. So somebody just wanted to get a little bit more of a rundown on that. So like you have those teams and the team is your course.
Mm-hmm. Right. So we have our team as every single course gets its own Figma team. So we'll add all of our members, which will be our class list in there. And then from there, we will have sharing properties on each of these projects. So for lecture slides, if I open this one and go into share, you can see that Steph and I are the only editors, and then everyone else just gets view access. This just makes sure that no one accidentally moves something around as they're checking back on lecture files. And then same thing with grades, we'll have no access at all for students and just have access for me and Steph. But then every single other file we give all of our students in the class, and we can do some like larger edits, like just having all members of team can edit, and we don't have to just plug in every single person's name. So those are some nice features to add in there.
That's really, really great and really helpful, and something that I just learned. I mean, it's like I'm aware of all these like little features, but I think it's fantastic because normally I would kind of just keep everything in like my own team. But I think it's cool here how you're able to manage on a project by project basis that has all of the files. You know, basically that they can view it, so they can view your lecture slides but not edit them, right? in a space where it's the project, they can have their own individual files that they can edit and play with. And so I saw a question earlier too. So someone was like, well, how can I do this if I only have a team with one other person? Just so everybody knows, if you go to figma.com/education, you can apply for the education plan, which is fundamentally the full professional Figma that's free, right? So as long as you and your students are education verified, the verification is almost instant. Don't even worry about seeing the verification email, especially during this time where everyone's on lockdown. You know, we wanted to make sure that people can do that. So figma.com/education, register, and then you have the fully professional features, you know, so that's what they're taking advantage of here when they're able to create those teams, kind of manage those students as members of that team. And I saw also that someone mentioned, you know, like, how do students retain their own files? Let's say if they're like no longer on the EDU team space, you know, one thing they can actually do if they're ever concerned about downloading files. I don't know if Steph and Ryan, you know about this, but they can download their .fig files, right? So if a student, you know, wants to make sure that they don't lose access to their file, when you open up a file, you can actually go and say file download .fig, and then it can be opened up and imported into Figma. So you can see Ryan's doing there. You go to it's actually save local version. You just hit export. So yeah, file, save local copy. When you go file, save local copy, it'll save that. So if students, you know, want to have a saved file, or let's say if you want to have a saved file that, you know, you really want it just on a hard drive, you're not believing in the cloud, you can actually do that as a backup for like any of their work or any of your work, or if they want to make sure that if they're no longer on the education plan, that they want to have a copy of their own work or transfer it to another team, that's going to be a good way to handle that. Cool. Is there any kind of accessibility issues that y'all have had in working with Figma in this way in the virtual classroom?
Not particularly with our group of students, for some of the accessibility issues that you might think of, but some of the initial things we found with working remote is the fact that everyone kind of has their own out of class experiences, and not everyone can make it to class every single time. Not everyone will have the same accommodations for internet and technology access. So we've done a really good job of trying to reach out to students and be sure they are caught up. Just recently with the winter storms in Portland, a lot of our students were without internet access, which shut down the school. But even when it reopened, some students were having issues like getting access to Figma because it is an online platform, as well as getting access to all of our lectures. So a lot of that was about recording all of our lectures, making accommodations for extended timelines, and then even just having that one-on-one communication after they could get the power back on, both through Zoom and Slack, was really great.
And I'm going to add one thing to that. So I'm actually at what I used to be at the Rochester Institute of Technology. Rochester has a very large deaf culture. So I'm actually wearing my Rochester sign. So Rochester's signed like that. So the visual collaboration platform of Figma actually worked out really well with my deaf students. They really enjoyed like collaborating and communicating like visually, being able to like type directly onto the canvas. It really made them feel like they had a voice. I would work with sign language interpreters. So I would have the sign language interpreter on my Zoom while we worked. So whenever I had students give feedback, or generally when we were having those kind of discussions, many of those discussions took place on the canvas as kind of like visual. So that worked out really well for us. Let's see. The one last thing too, I'm seeing a couple questions. So people are asking if you all have shared anything within the Figma community. So if you had like a syllabus file or like a grading file, or, you know, is there anything that you're making available to the broader community that other people can like learn from and or use?
We'd love to do that. We haven't done it yet, but we have a couple of different templates. Obviously, because we're working so quickly, none of them are very polished. Steph and I are cramming slides together all the time, and making quick tweaks. But we definitely love to share some of this content with the community. I think the community is a great resource for educators. We found some great content on there. We also point all of our students to the community, so they're not recreating like iOS keyboards and like system-based UI, and also giving them access to icons and illustrations is really great for when they're doing rapid prototyping.
Yeah, we'd be happy to make these, put these on community. Let us know which things you want in the chat.
Cool. Yeah, I mean, it would be great. So, I'd really like to see, what y'all come up with and like what you share. And like, I'll make sure that it's shared with the Friends of Figma educators group. So if y'all go to friends.figma.com, we have a user group where, we'll have like events, and we also have a space on the forum too, where we'll be sharing, like other files and insights. So we just started this up. So I'm actually going to type it into the chat. So it's forum.figma.com/educators. We just kicked this off about, like a week ago, but it's a space on the forum, kind of like a support forum, but we want to treat it more as of a community where people can kind of post this stuff. So, I would love for you all to, when you get a community file made, or even just your first one going, to share that on the forum. I think that would be great and it'd help out a lot of people.
Cool. You can do that.
All right. Cool. So let's do one more question here as we're starting to wind down. Let's see. Here's a couple things really quick. So I saw a question about an LMS. Is there like any LMS that PSU requires you to use? And what I mean by that is like a learning management software. So Steph, you're familiar with my courses over at RIT. Do you interface with anything that is like required by PSU?
Well, PSU uses my courses, D2L. I think it has different names, but they do not require us to use it. So we don't use it, we haven't been forced to use a tool that we didn't want to use. So yeah.
Yeah, all of our turning in projects and everything is done within Figma, Slack, and Zoom. We have also used Basecamp in the past within the program. But when it came time to look into tools for this class, we just really wanted to keep a very tight tool set. So the only other thing we'll use, maybe like school-wise, is Portland State has their own system for submitting grades. And that's about the only faculty level thing we'll interface with regularly with this class.
There was one more thing. So I was going to add to that too. So like when I was at RIT, we had to use my courses, specifically centered around the notion of course continuity, making sure that content was available for students. We were required to use the LMS. And while I facilitated the majority of my class in Figma in a very similar fashion to y'all, what I would do is I would just post my links there. So there would just basically be like a duplicate that I would share some of those like Figma links towards. So if anybody, like says, oh, okay, I need to go in like week 5 of the lecture, they're still able to like go in and they'll see like a link to a document that'll go out to the Figma, and maybe at least just I would basically do like the minimum viable product. There you go, for using the LMS, but it still worked out pretty well. So like I never necessarily had any like iterations with that, or I would use the LMS at least to point to Figma and to the syllabus and some of those documents. All right, so last thing, do you feel like this can be used for other classrooms outside of design classrooms?
Absolutely. We highly encourage anybody who is interested in just like deck building and creating some of these interactive like education moments to do it in Figma, especially for the remote learning style that Steph and I do, where we are not in the same room and we have to create a class from 2 different states. Figma has been instrumental for creating all of this content. We could go and use some other tools like Google Docs and slides and things to create more traditional content. But Figma has all the tools to make things much more beautiful. We can also teach students a brand new tool if they want to start using it for their education. So highly recommend it.
Yeah.
All right, cool. Thank you so much. I'm going to take over the screen share for this last little bit here. But thank you so much, Ryan. Thank you so much, Steph, for like sharing this like really, really awesome rundown of how you've been using Figma in the classroom. I am definitely inspired. I actually wish I had a class coming up that I could teach because, man, these are some like great little tools and tidbits that I think that everyone can really benefit from. So those of you joining us specifically for today, you can find future live streams at figma.com/events. If you have any suggestions or ideas for future live streams, something that you want to see, something that you think you can really benefit from, send those to community@figma.com. Remember to sign up for the education. Like we get, as educators, we get Figma for free. We get the team features for free. And we're going to be benefiting from that, you know, like towards the future, no matter your classroom, no matter the size, even if you are at a boot camp, remember to get those students too, have them register so then that way they're able to take advantage of the same features as you. So thank you all so much. Thank you, Ryan. Thank you, Steph. It's been a pleasure. Thank you all of you for joining us today from around the globe. We really appreciate you and have a wonderful evening.
Thanks, y'all.
Thank you.